So, we come to the end of the story of the kings of Israel and Judah. The story ended for Israel some 120 years before they were destroyed by Sennacherib. Shortly after that, Judah was given a miraculous deliverance at the hands of Sennacherib, and it led some of the Jewish people to think that the temple was sacrosanct, to think that if we just keep the temple rituals going, Jerusalem will never fall. Jeremiah came and warned them that that wasn't true. He said, "Stop saying this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. It's not going to save you." And Isaiah came saying, "The Lord is sick to his stomach of your rituals and your sacrifices. What the Lord wants is justice for the oppressed and care for the widow and the orphan." But they didn't listen. In the years of Josiah, it must have seemed like a golden summer that would never come to an end. But it was an Indian summer. After King Josiah, it took just 22 years, 4 wicked kings, and the end came. This time it came at the hands of Babylon. It was a carbon copy of what happened to Israel 120 years before. I've hardly had to change my map. The trouble had been brewing 1,200 kilometers away in Mesopotamia. Babylon had by now supplanted Assyria as the great world power. And just like Assyria, they swept across the Fertile Crescent, flattening everything in their course, and then they came to Jerusalem. But this time there was no deliverance. They broke into the city, they destroyed the temple, they burnt the city, they pulled the walls down and left the place a complete ruin. Then they took all the best people and took them back to Babylon and settled them there. And there one of them wrote Psalm 137, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I forget you, O Jerusalem." And some of them didn't forget. One of them was named Nehemiah. But we come then to the end of the experiment that Israel made for 500 years with monarchy. Let's scroll back up to the top, and I just want to make a couple of general comments as we finish. It all began when the people begged for a king. Samuel very unwillingly anointed Saul, and under Saul and David and Solomon for 100 years, the 12 tribes of Israel were united as one kingdom, and for one brief time, they were actually quite a force in world history. But when Solomon died, Jeroboam and Rehoboam fought over the succession, and they split the nation in two, never to be united again, never to be a significant force in the world again. It's quite scary, isn't it, that we have the power in the heat of the moment to do things that never get repaired. On a small scale, my wife had an uncle called Uncle Bill, very nice man, but he had grown very overweight in his old age. And at a big family get-together, one of the aunties came and poked him in his stomach and said, "So Bill, when's the baby due?" Well, Bill took deep offense and the family split, and it was never repaired. They both took that to their death. We have the power to do things that never get repaired. Let me colour the kings of Israel and Judah in green and red for good and evil. They're not all thoroughly good or thoroughly evil. You'll see the first 3 are all a mixture. But look at the kings of Israel. Every single one of them evil. All down the line, 19 of them, all evil. And when I say evil, I mean that they fell prey to the dreadful disease of idolatry with all its dastardly deeds. I spent a lot of time trying to grasp what the attraction was to the Jews and the Israelites of idolatry. And to be honest, I really haven't come up with an answer. With my white Western background, it's just not part of my experience and I can't see it. Perhaps in the ministry I got a couple of little insights. I heard a woman give a testimony. She was brought up in an occult family, and as she grew up, she took on from her mother all her occult practices. And she says, our life was in a complete shambles, but it never occurred to us that it might have anything to do with our practices. She said we were like the fish swimming in the sea, where the daddy fish said to the son, "The water's warm today," and the son said, "Daddy, what's water?" She said, "You're engrossed in it, you're embraced in it, you don't even know you're in it." By the way, she later became a pastor. And then there was an Indian woman in one of my churches, lovely Christian woman who'd been converted from Hinduism. Strangely, her family didn't mind her dabbling in Christianity. One day I visited her in her home and I noticed in the corner a few statues. They looked like Indian statues and I didn't think much about them. Later she told me that they were actually a shrine to the ancestors. They were idols and she'd kept them in her home. Then the Lord convicted her that she should get rid of them. And that was when all hell broke loose with her family. They didn't mind her dabbling in Christianity, but they didn't want her getting rid of those idols. There's something about idolatry that has a tremendous hold on people. And we Westerners must be careful that we don't think we're superior. We have different idolatries. And I wonder how much the church is being squeezed into the mold of the world around us in issues like materialism and me-firstness and sexual morality. Sometimes I think the church is looking less and less different from the world around us. But as I look down this long list of 200 years of evil kings, and I think to myself, God kept trying to win them back. He stood by them because of his covenant with Abraham. It says to me, it's not easy to get out of God's covenant. You've really got to want to get out. You've really got to work at it. So great is God's faithfulness and love. But in the end, he does get rid of them. In his words, he divorces them. And so there we have the destruction of Israel and Samaria and the destruction of Jerusalem. But there is a very big difference between those two destructions. The destruction of Israel was punishment. The destruction of Judah was discipline. God decided that he'd had enough of this idolatry and he was going to cleanse it from their system. And he used the Babylonian captivity to do it. And you know that it worked. From Mount Sinai to the end of the Kings, about 1,000 years, the Jews never stopped hankering after idols. From the Babylonian captivity to the present day, 2,400 years, Jews have never gone back to idolatry. We saw that for ourselves. We were in Jerusalem, as you know, and the old city of Jerusalem, the Jewish quarter, was almost totally destroyed in 1948 during the War of Independence. And the famous ancient synagogue of Herva was burnt to the ground. Well, it's all been rebuilt. We went in through the Zion Gate. When you go in through the Zion Gate, which is the entrance to the Jewish quarter, you can still see the bullet holes from the 1948 war. We went in through the Zion Gate, and there, right in front of you, is the Herva synagogue. You can see its dome beyond the flowers. We went inside. Rather delightfully, there was a group of rabbinic students in the front arguing away at points of the law in the way that Jewish people do. And the decor is beautiful. Do you notice what they don't have? Got a stained glass window. There's a beautiful ceiling, a domed roof. The top of each pillar, there are beautiful paintings. Do you notice anything about them? They've got water and greenery, and they symbolize fruit and houses and God's goodness. But what they don't have is any human figures, no faces, nothing that could suggest a graven image. Jews have never gone back to idolatry. And so the end of our story finds them with the city destroyed and sitting by the rivers of Babylon weeping. But it's not the end. This was only discipline. It's to these distressed people that Jeremiah says his famous verse, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. The purple line of David will continue even across into Babylon and eventually back to Jerusalem, down to Jesus, and right down to the present day in the Jews. It's been a dark story, hasn't it? Lots of darkness, but wherever there's been darkness, God has brought light. This series has been based on the book of Kings and the book of Chronicles. We end by looking at the last verse of each of those books. The last verse of the book of Chronicles reads, The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia. He charged him to build a house of Jerusalem And Cyrus said, "Whoever among you is of his people, may the Lord his God be with you. Let him go up." God stirs up a pagan king to enable the Jews to go back and the story to continue. And then the last verse of the book of Kings. We get a glimpse of the last real king of Judah, Jehoiakim. He also has been carted across to Babylon and sat down and wept. But look at the last verse of the book of Kings. The king of Babylon graciously freed Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from prison. And he spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat above the seats of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiakim put off his prison garments, and every day of his life he dined regularly at the king's table. It was discipline. It's not over. There's hope and a future. And Jehoiakim sitting at the king's table is a picture to me of us one day when we have finished our walk. Maybe we've passed through the valley of shadow of death, maybe of sin. But he will prepare a table before us, and we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Praise God, He's come.